Let's look at 5 ways Iran might respond to Israel here in the coming days. And one of these, not getting talked about enough. So this comes following the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, in Tehran about a week ago. Haniyeh was under the protection of the IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, while in Tehran for the Iranian presidential inauguration. Pretty big event. And his hotel room went boom. He and his bodyguard were killed. According to the New York Times, this was due to a bomb that had been placed under his bed months ahead of time, suggesting that Israel or someone else knew exactly where Haniyeh was going to be staying. And according to the IRGC, they're still putting out statements saying that he was killed with a short-range projectile, something fired nearby, maybe some sort of ATGM, anti-tank guided missile. Now, for a full week now, the world has been kind of on edge, waiting to see how Iran is going to respond to this event. And we're going to run through 5 possible ways. I'm going to rank each one of these from least likely 1 to most likely number 5. Now, there's a couple different things to consider when looking at this. The first and foremost is what's important here. And that sounds silly, but is the important thing in the Iranian perspective, or from the Iranian perspective, that Israel is damaged and sustains casualties and buildings destroyed, things like that? Or is it showing that they did something? Is it the signaling? And that's important because depending on what Iran prioritizes here, they're going to take different actions. This war that's been raging for a long time between Iran and Israel has been primarily fought in the shadows. There's only been a few times where it's really kind of come out into the overt realm, if you will, and that hasn't always gone well, at least from Iran's perspective. So we're really going to break this down into 2 categories. We have overt attacks. This is essentially Iran showing their hand, being able to clearly say, this was us, we did this thing. And then we have the covert realm, which is a little bit more under the radar, again, more in line with how this war between Israel and Iran has been carried out in recent years. So starting with the first, the most likely from my perspective and what's getting the most attention around the world is some sort of coordinated direct military action carried out against Israel. Now, this is incredibly broad. There's a lot of different directions this could go. This is the most dangerous scenario for Israel. We'll talk about that in a second, but it's also the riskiest for Iran. So while this is kind of where everyone is pointing, there's a lot of downsides to Iran, carrying out some sort of military response here. If we look back to April, when Iran did this following the assassination of an IRGC official, an Iranian official in Syria, the results weren't great. I'm talking about 300 plus drones, missiles, and rockets fired at Israel. A lot of them failed before leaving Iranian territory. Most of them then were intercepted by Israel, the United States, and other Israeli allies in the region. And then only a few, like somewhere between 3, 5, 6 maybe, got through and actually penetrated Israeli air defenses and impacted inside of Israel. That's not a good look. Across the board, a lot of that makes it kind of look like Iran might not be as strong as they were once presenting. So it's not entirely clear, based off of that data point, if Iran would want to go back to that well and show their hand again in the conventional realm. And of course, the minute they go conventional, they open up the possibility of a conventional response, and Israel has significant advantages over Iran and all of their proxies in the conventional fight, which is why Iran has wanted to keep this in the shadows for as long as possible. Now, there's a wide range when looking at the possibility of some sort of conventional attack against Israel. It's not as simple as Iran just, instead of launching 300 munitions, maybe they launch 400 or 500 or 600. The key here, and what makes this most dangerous for Israel, is if multiple proxies, multiple organizations inside of the so-called axis of resistance were able to attack generally at the same time. Now, this doesn't have to be overly coordinated. Really, if a couple of these groups were to fire their munitions in the span of like a 6 to 12-hour window, it still could have the desired effect because they're just going to be chewing through Israeli air defense interceptors. And there's only so many of those that can be utilized, so many air defense platforms that can be deployed to certain parts of the country. Now, the Islamic resistance in Iraq does have some relatively advanced capabilities that we've seen in recent years. In terms of volume, they can't send a lot. Same with the Houthis. They have shown the ability to get some munitions into Israeli territory, not a lot, and they've got to bypass all the American assets in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Hezbollah is the big one here, and there's reason to believe that Hezbollah might want to kind of coordinate, in a sense, this attack with with Iran on Israel. And the reason for that is the same day that Ismail Haniyeh was killed in Tehran, Fuad Shakur was killed in Beirut. He's the chief of staff of the Hezbollah military, the senior-most Hezbollah official killed by Israel since this war began. And Israel confirmed that they carried out the strike that killed Shakur. So it's entirely possible that Hezbollah wants to do something to respond to that strike. They could coordinate with Iran, and if that happens, between Hezbollah and Iran, they do have enough munitions, enough advanced munitions to be able to strike multiple areas across Israel, or I should say target multiple areas across Israel, and likely enough to overwhelm Israeli air defenses. So that right there, the Hezbollah, Iran, if they want to go the overt route, show their hand, a direct military strike, those two carrying out an attack inside of Israel is, at this point, probably the most likely. However, it is the most dangerous for Israel and also the most dangerous for Iran. So in terms of likeliness, that one for me is a 5. That is the most likely scenario that we should see from Iran here in the near future. The second one here, and kind of sticking in that overt realm where everybody can very clearly tell that Iran is behind this, in fact, they might even be doing it to show that they are behind it, would be shutting down the Persian Gulf. Now, in terms of the likeliness of this, I have this as a 2 out of 5. 5 most likely, 1 least likely. I don't think there's a high possibility here. I think it's worth bringing up because Iran could do this relatively easily. I mean, if we look at what the Houthis have done in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, it took very little to effectively shut down that shipping route. Iran has, significantly more capabilities and could do this very quickly in the Persian Gulf. The challenge here, of course, is this isn't very targeted at Israel. This is more of a global response. And, you maybe could present this as a way of Iran saying they're not okay with the world being okay with Israel carrying out this assassination inside of their territory. But it kind of borders on a temper tantrum and just taking this out on everyone when realistically the guilty party, most likely, but they still haven't claimed responsibility for the Haniyeh assassination, is Israel. So shut down the Persian Gulf, to me, it's a 2 out of 5, one of the least likely possibilities, but I feel like it's worth throwing in there just because, Iran could do it relatively easily. Then shifting over to the covert realm, this is something that is designed to send a signal to Israel, maybe the rest of the world, but it really limits Israel's ability to respond. And the reason I say that is when you have a missile coming from Iran and it strikes inside of Israel and kills an Israeli citizen, that's very clear. The guilty culprit is Iran, and there's likely to be a military response. When you get into this covert realm and it's a little bit vague about who carried out the attack, kind of vague on what the actual fallout was, did anybody actually die, it becomes much more complicated to formulate some sort of clear response. So the first one here that I want to talk to in the covert front is an Iranian cyber attack. And I actually think that's pretty likely, maybe a 4 out of 5 in terms of the likeliness that this could occur sometime in the next few weeks. And the reason for that is Iran has a pretty robust cyber capability. They've been engaged in cyber warfare with the United States, Israel, and others for quite a while. It could be a way to, very specifically target Israeli assets at home or abroad, but still carry out that attack, if you will, below the threshold that could result in direct Israeli military action. So I think a cyber attack has to be on people's mind. It probably has to be something to the scope that it would actually be recognized and acknowledged on the global scale. Again, what Iran is going for here is, in the covert realm, is signaling to Israel and others, we still can carry out some sort of attack. We still can hurt you in a way. Then the second one that I put in the covert realm here is Iran striking an Israeli embassy or consulate or assassinating a senior Israeli official abroad. I put this at a likeliness of 3 out of 5. It's right in the middle, which you might argue is way too high because there's a lot of risks that come with this. The reason I have this as a 3 and feel like it's at least worth addressing is it has the potential to be very, very targeted in the sense of kind of limiting the total number of casualties, limiting the overall amount of damage. And it is something that Iran has the capabilities of either doing themselves or carrying out through kind of a cutout, a proxy somewhere abroad where their fingerprints are kind of on it, but it's hard to assign direct responsibility, which could limit, again, Israel's direct military response to Iran following this action. Now, the challenge here is just like what we saw happen in Tehran, Haniyeh was killed under the protection of the IRGC. That made Iran look bad. There's no country in the world that is going to say, hey, Iran, we've got this Israeli embassy or consulate. We're okay with you coming in and killing one of them or bombing the complex. It's going to make that country look bad. And there's no country that's really going to want to do that for Iran. If you look at the list of where Israel has their embassies and consulates around the world, none of these are so close to Iran that they're going to be willing to sacrifice everything to allow the Iranian leadership to get this little bit of retribution. And then the last one here that is not getting anywhere near enough attention, but I feel like we got to bring it up, even if it's a small possibility, is the chance that Iran does nothing at all. And this isn't do nothing at all because they can't. It's choosing to not take action because they think that is within their greater interest right now as they look out to the future. So worth talking about this for a second. I put this, for what it's worth, at a likeliness of 1 out of 5, the least likely, just because, man, it seems like everything is trending towards a kinetic response recently. But again, worth discussing this because this kind of hints at the idea of returning to the status quo with Israel, recognizing that from the Iranian perspective, recognizing that Israel is in a tough spot right now in Gaza. So if they view Israel's position on the world stage and kind of their global standing as deteriorating, it might be in Iran's best interest to just set back and wait for that to happen, kind of let it play out. And this kind of goes in line with a lot of the media that's released in recent weeks and months from the Axis of Resistance, where they're constantly talking about how Israel is defeating themselves in Gaza. Now, I think there's just some talking points to that, but there is something to be said for the international support of Israel kind of slipping away in recent months, and it's nowhere near what it was at the beginning of the war in early October. I mean, at this point, Iran can kind of look at what happened, the response already from the U.S., Israel, and others, and see that just they're talking about doing something and the suggestion that they might strike has caused significant turmoil, right? I mean, Israel is on pins and needles, having countless government meetings, kind of preparing for what might happen here. The U.S. has sent additional troops to the Middle East. There's a real cost associated with that and putting our sons and daughters in harm's way. Countless airlines have canceled flights in and out of portions of the Middle East. And they could just sit on this. Say, well, we have the decision point now. We can decide when and if and where we're going to attack. And if they sit on this for a couple weeks and kind of keep leaking these ideas that it might happen and then never doing anything, that could be genuinely exhausting for the United States and Israel and probably some others. So again, likeliness of 1, very low compared to all the others, but I feel like it's at least worth bringing up the possibility that Iran just looks at this, says, not right now, make them sweat. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if you're interested in this or other national security subjects, be sure to check out our Substack, which is linked in the description below. It's like a mix between a newsletter and a website. We put together a couple articles per week, diving into a variety of subjects. On this front, we've talked about Hezbollah's war chest, how they fund their military, the Iranian proxy strategy, as well as the Iranian military-industrial complex, which is pretty interesting. All linked in the description below if you want to check that out. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.